In an adventure into the unknown, where the joy of discovery is only equaled by the dangers that lie, what happens when the unthinkable happens? Today, we'll look at 3 disturbing stories about divers who were attracted into the depths by the attraction of the unknown, only to discover that the caves had no intention to let them go. Welcome back to Disasterology, and this is the Font Estramar Cave tragedy. Beginning with the first tale, Font Estramar is a great submerged cave system hidden under the peaceful landscape of southern France. At the same time, this peaceful place is both breathtaking and uniquely dangerous. It has long served as a trap for those who seek to test the limits of human endurance. Claims of its natural beauty can be made forever, but to Font Estramar, it has dark stories like that of a skilled deep-sea diver named Jean-Claude, who died in it. A bright morning, Jean-Claude, his brother Dumas, and his close friends finally reached Font Estramar. They had been planning and preparing for months and were now on the edge of this adventure. The cave was close by, clean and shining in the morning light. The weather was really good, and everything was high and full of spirit. Jean-Claude, being the older of the 2 brothers, was full of energy. Out of the 2, he had always been the more adventurous, pushing limits and accepting challenges that others would be afraid to take on. Even though Dumas was generally more cautious, he trusted Jean-Claude's judgment and did as he was told. They were determined to make the most out of their dive gear, even if it was far from the most advanced equipment accessible to modern divers. With each step precise and well-coordinated, the group entered Font Estramar's clear, cold waters. The sunlight quickly disappeared as they walked deeper into the cave and was replaced by the strange bluish glow of their dive lights shining through the shadows. The dive went quite well in the first few hours. The group took breathtaking footage of the cave's structures and beauty, navigating the system with ease. They faced challenges like narrow passageways, abrupt drops, and heavy silt clouds, but nothing impossible. The deeper they went, the more excited they became. They were making history, as no one had gone so deep into the Font Estramar ever before. But as the day went on, the cave's true colors were being seen. The water became colder and more uncomfortable, and the channels became narrower and confusing. Their movements started to mix up sand, which blocked their vision and turned the clear water into a soupy, cloudy mess. The excitement that had driven them earlier was giving way to exhaustion as the physical strain started to take its toll. The team pushed regardless of these obstacles because they believed they were about to make an achievement. But they soon realized they had exceeded themselves. As they got closer to what they had intended to be their last push before coming back to the surface, doubts began to set in. Their oxygen supply decreased more quickly than what they expected. Not only were they breathing heavily, but their hearts were also beating quickly due to the exertion and their gradual understanding that they were in serious danger. It was time to turn back, and so the team started their way back. Together, they swam along the narrow passages with determination and growing anxiety. The thrilling dive a while ago was now a race against time, a desperate need to reach the surface before running out of air. But something worse was about to happen. Somewhere along the way, in poor light and whirling sand, Jean-Claude became separated from the group. It happened so fast that the others didn't realize it until they had almost reached the surface. They swam out of the water relieved, only to turn around and realize Jean-Claude was missing. Panic set in. They knew the cave well enough to know that Jean-Claude was in big trouble if he wasn't already on his way up. Dumas fell between concern for his brother's safety as well as the need to survive and made an adverse decision. He couldn't leave his brother behind, so Dumas ignored the others' objections and slipped back into the water, determined to find Jean-Claude. He was tired, his air supply low, and the tunnel was dangerous to navigate, especially after such a long and challenging dive. But the brothers' relationship was stronger than his fear. Dumas understood that if the roles were reversed, Jean-Claude would do the same for him. As he re-entered the cave, the darkness seemed even more terrible than before. The once-known passageways suddenly felt like a maze, with each twist and turn bringing him deeper into confusion. Dumas' mind raced as he felt the rough walls, shining his light into every crack and shade, hoping to see a sign of his brother. But as time passed, Dumas' hope faded. The cave appeared to be swallowing him whole, and with each passing moment, the chances of finding Jean-Claude alive reduced. His air supply was extremely low, and he knew if he didn't turn back soon, he'd face the same death as his brother. Finally, with a disappointed heart, Dumas decided to stop his search. He began the long, painful climb back to the surface, each stroke of his fins filled with fear and distress. As he emerged from the water, he realized something. Jean-Claude was no longer there. The next few days were a cloud of sadness and disbelief. The rescue teams worked tirelessly to search every inch of the cave, but there was no sign of Jean-Claude. The diving community was deeply impacted by the tragedy and mourned the death of one of their own. Even as they grieved, they couldn't help but wonder about what happened to Jean-Claude in his final moments. Had he gone deeper into the cave? 3 years later, an unknowing diver investigating Font Estramar discovered human remains stuck into a tight crack deep within the cave, answering some of the questions. The body was badly decomposed, but there was little doubt that it was Jean-Claude's. His equipment was still strapped to what remained of his body, a dark reminder of the dangers of Font Estramar. His demise, while unfortunate, emphasized on the enormous hazards involved in exploring such a harsh environment. In the years after, the area of the cave where Jean-Claude vanished has been sealed up, serving as a reminder of the dangers that lay beneath the surface of Font Estramar. For those who knew him, Jean-Claude's story served as a warning, a reminder that even the most experienced and skilled divers are vulnerable to the dangers of the deep. In the second story, Mark Slusky appeared to resist limitations. Growing up in Belgium, he was known for his bold nature and unstoppable curiosity. Whether it was his incredible 55-mile solo swim across the English Channel in 1988 or setting a high-altitude bungee jumping record from 22,000 feet, Mark was always pushing the limits of what was possible. By 2018, Mark had become an excellent diver, having spent months producing a documentary called Sharkwise with great white sharks. Mark, despite his many accomplishments, was not one to sit back and be satisfied. His desire for adventure remained strong, even as he shifted his concentration to coaching and advising. So, when the opportunity arrived for exploring the fascinating Font Estramar Cave network in southern France, he decided to take it up. On the morning of June 28, 2018, Mark and his close friend, Laurent Richard, prepared for the dive that had been planned for months. The Font Estramar Cave system was infamous for its complicated channels and outstanding depths, but Mark embraced the challenge. They were given permission from the landowner, who was a fan of Mark's adventures, and the two companions were excited to see what unexpected discoveries awaited them. As they put on their gear and approached the calm waters of the pond that hid the cave's entrance, Mark was in high spirits, cracking jokes and relaxing the situation. Laurent, on the other hand, couldn't help but feel uneasy. But they'd traveled this far, and there was no going back now. The initial journey into the cave was thrilling. The two of them went effortlessly through the water, crossing the dark, tiny channels with the skills and precision of experienced divers. The pleasure of discovering unexplored territory drove them on, and even when Mark's gear stuck on a sharp rock, ripping part of it off, he swiftly adjusted and continued forward. However, as the dive went on, the adrenaline that had first fueled them began to wear off, giving way to the physical and emotional strain of the severe environment. The cave became increasingly gloomy as they moved deeper. The cold, black water closed in around them, and the tight channels that had once provided excitement now felt like a trap. They eventually reached a time when their oxygen reserves decreased to the point where they had to turn back. Laurent knew it was time to pay attention to the warning signs and start his way to the surface. But Mark, being the risk-taker, had different intentions. Despite understanding the regulations of diving and the risks of pushing beyond the boundaries, he could not resist going further deeper. Laurent watched in terror as Mark waved goodbye and swam deeper into the cave, ignoring the logic and safety regulations that both men were so familiar with. Laurent hesitated for a while, caught between his friend's advice and his own desire for survival. Finally, he decided to return alone, hoping that Mark would realize his mistake and return shortly. Meanwhile, Mark continued to dive, reaching a depth of 380 feet, far deeper than he had planned to go. The water was cooler, the pressure was higher, and the air in his tanks was decreasing faster than he had expected. For a brief while, he was enjoying life on an edge, but the reality of his circumstances rapidly sunk in. He had gone too far and needed to return to the surface before it was too late. As Laurent waited at the surface, he became concerned when Mark did not appear. He returned to the cave with a group of other divers to hunt for him. As they went deeper, Laurent became more concerned with filming the rescue than with rescuing his companion. Panic set in. What began as a daring adventure had turned into a double tragedy. The search efforts increased, but the cave that had attracted Mark and Laurent with the promise of discovery now appeared determined to hold them inside long. The rescue operations were eventually called off, leaving both men's fates unknown. 2 months later, in September 2018, Mark's body was found deep within the cave. The discovery was bittersweet. His loved ones finally received some closure, but the circumstances of his death served as a reminder of the risks he had taken. Laurent's body, however, was never discovered, adding to the already heartbreaking story. Following the incident, many in the diving community questioned if Mark was genuinely qualified to take on such a risky dive. The very traits that had made Mark Slutsky a legend in the world of extreme sports might have also been his downfall. And for the last story, it was a bright, sunny afternoon on the Yucatan Peninsula, and the turquoise seas of the Caribbean coast shone with an inviting light. For 3 experienced divers, it was the ideal day to explore Sistema Sac Actun, one of the world's most intriguing and complex underwater cave systems. Sac Actun was a location full of mystery and charm. The cave system made a sensation after the remains of a mastodon were discovered just a few meters beneath the surface in 2008. However, its fascination was not limited to anthropologists. It also drew recreational divers looking for the excitement of exploring the unknown. On this particular day, 3 men prepared for what they hoped would be a safe and memorable event. The 3 divers' identities were never disclosed, but they were believed to be relatively experienced. The group was led by a 33-year-old Quintana Roo, Mexico-based guide and qualified cave diving instructor. He was familiar with the cave system, having explored it with his clients several times. However, his expertise with the closed-circuit rebreather or CCR system, a type of diving equipment that recycles exhaled air, was restricted to open water situations. They were a huge group in terms of experience and equipment, but they all had one common goal, and that was to explore the depths of Sac Actun. After putting on their gear and discussing their dive plan one last time, the men entered the water about 2:15 p.m. They had divided the dive into sections, each identified by a specific spot within the cave. The first section was a pretty straightforward 30-minute swim from the entrance to point 4. They built wires along the road to keep them on track and safe, serving as lifelines in the event of an emergency. The first part of the dive went smoothly. They easily crossed the underwater maze, and when they surfaced and took an opportunity to breathe fresh air and plan their next dive, the water was nice and clean, and the sunshine filtered through the trees above, creating glittering patterns on the cave walls. It was an unearthly experience that reminded them of why they enjoyed diving. At around 2:50 p.m., they began the second stage of the dive, moving for point 5, with the goal of reaching Cenote Nariz. This section of the cave was more difficult, with narrower channels and a more complicated design. While swimming, they came across a tiny bottleneck in the passageway. Despite his skill, the lead diver found it difficult to go through with his complex CCR gear. The sharp rocks scraped his arms and legs, and he realized he couldn't continue down this path. The lead diver decided to take a different route, so he turned back and directed the others to point 5 by a new way. The diversion went easily, and they were soon back on track, arriving at point 5 on time at 3:15 p.m. But it was here that the first signs of disaster appeared. Diver 3 indicated to the others that he had reached his turn pressure, which meant he had consumed 1/3 of his air supply and needed to return back. As Diver 3 turned back, the other 2 divers continued, determined to reach their goal. They passed point 7 and reached a deeper, more difficult section of the cave network. The water here was cooler, the passageways were narrower, and the sense of isolation was more intense. It was a challenging situation for even the most experienced divers. Diver 2 was shocked as a flash of light appeared behind him. He spun around and spotted Diver 1 in a state of terror. His face was pale, and his eyes were wide open in horror. Diver 1 was in great difficulties. Diver 2 started in terror as Diver 1 began throwing his arms and legs tirelessly. During the journey, his regulator, the device that provided him with air, got entangled with his gear. Diver 2 understood that in cases like this, attempting to aid an anxious diver could result in death for both of them. Diver 2 was forced to withdraw himself from his companion, watching helplessly as he fought for his life. Diver 2 ran into Diver 3 near point 7 while returning via the tunnel. The 2 guys arrived at 4:52 p.m., their hearts racing with terror. The head of their group, the man who had led them through this dangerous dive, was gone. The recovery operation began the next day itself. The search was led by 2 local cave diving instructors, with assistance from local divers, police officers, and civil authorities. As they proceeded into the cave, Diver 1 was promptly found. However, the actual cause of his death remained unknown. The evidence suggested cognitive impairment, which likely contributed to his drowning. But what created the impairment in the first place? Sac Actun's appeal, with its spectacular beauty, claimed another victim. For the 2 surviving divers, the event served as a reminder of the dangers that are under the surface, even for the most prepared. Each story is a reminder of the pursuit of adventure, where the thrill of the unknown sometimes crosses paths with tragedy. For now, the full stories of what happened in those fateful dives may remain locked in the depths, but their legacies live on, compelling others to explore, yet reminding them of the ultimate price that the quest for discovery can demand.